Around 8 years ago, I bought this 1960s era brick house in central Utah for $65,000. Then I remodeled it inside and out and moved into it. This is my daughter's room. She helps me on projects sometimes, and she'll be 20 years old this spring. I've always planned on helping her buy a cheap fixer-upper house and remodeling it like I did. But home prices in our area have skyrocketed over the past few years, even for the old fixer-uppers. High interest rates and rising inflation have made it nearly impossible for first-time home buyers to get into a home. So rather than crying about it, we're going to resort to Plan B, a bit of a house hack, you might say. When we remodeled the place several years ago, we built this nice little walk-in closet and a separate bathroom with this custom tile shower. The plan is to cut a doorway right here that will come out right here on the other side of the wall into what I'm currently using as a storage room. Then we'll turn this area into a small apartment with a kitchenette, laundry room, and living room. So I started out by laying out an approximately 3 foot by 3 foot landing coming off the bedroom. I'm going to end up with 2 steps. The existing house is approximately 16 inches higher than this area that we're coming into. Next, I plumbed up off the edge of the landing to make a mark for my short wall, and found me a contractor's notepad so I could jot down all the materials I need. And after making me a comprehensive list, otherwise known as a guesstimate, it was off to the local lumber yard. Okay, let's make some sawdust. I started by reinstalling the 2x that I'd taken off when I cut the hole in the wall for the doorway. I'm going to use them for nailing and sheetrock backing on the short wall. Next, I measured off of the outside of the future door. This gave me a 3 foot landing and determined the length of the short wall that went from floor to ceiling. And after measuring and marking the end of the short wall, I cut a piece of green plate because it's going directly against the concrete. If you've watched some of my videos, you'll notice that I use my concrete hammer drill to drill a hole into the bottom plate and then wedge a couple nails in there. I've just found this works better for me to do this rather than the powder actuated nailers. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, I'm just saying that's how I do it. Next, I laid the wall out. There's a total of 4 studs in this wall. I did 2 on the end. I like to use a double stud on the end just to make it more rigid. And then 1 in the center, actually on a 16-inch center, and then 1 against the wall. At that point, I got out my trusty laser. I used it to transfer the line from the bottom plate to the top plate. And that's when I realized I screwed up. I forgot to put blocking in the ceiling to nail the top plate too. I was going to edit it out and cover it up so you guys thought that I never screwed up, but I thought I better come clean, so let's get into it and get it fixed. That wasn't so bad. For you got to time-lapse through it. The sun's out today and shining pretty brightly through the windows, so I wasn't able to use my laser level to plumb up, so I had to go old school method with a 2x4 and my 6 foot level. After determining the angle because of the sloped ceiling, I cut both ends of my top plate and installed it into that nice new freshly installed backing. I measured, cut, and installed my 4 wall studs. With the wall complete, I decided to get into the landing next. The first thing on the agenda is to remove these last 2 courses of brick right down to the foundation. When I removed the rest of the brick, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to finish it out. With the brick torn out, the first thing I wanted to do was check level on this floor. You never know with these old houses, but it actually looked pretty good. Another thing that worked out great is the old pine that they sheeted the original floor with is actually 3/4 inches thick, the same as my sheeting that I purchased. It should work out great. At that point I transferred me a level line from the existing floor onto my new framing. Then I made me a level line on both sides of the landing against the framing to mark the top edge of the ledger boards so I knew exactly where to nail them. Next I squared off the front of my new wall to make a mark for the front edge of the landing. Then it was time to get back into the framing. First I cut and nailed in a piece of blocking that was required for ledger nailing and drywall backing. Then I measured and cut 2x6s and nailed them to the 3 sides of the landing for ledger boards. As small as the landing is, I only ended up with 1 joist in the middle. I measured it and marked it out on 16-inch center, cut it and nailed it in. For the front of the landing I used this 2x12 I had. It's a little wide, a little bit overkill, but I wanted the step to have solid nailing, so it worked out great. Earlier I mentioned that there's about 16 inches difference between floors. I don't want to have a whole bunch of steps and have this thing push out into the living space where the living space is so small, so I ended up with 2 risers that are about 8 inches, which is max height building code in my area for steps. And after cutting and installing this one last piece of blocking that was required, it was time to get this step built. Next, I measured the front of the step and cut the other piece of 2x12 to length. I know that seems like overkill, but 1, I already have the board, and 2, I need to rip it down anyway because this old concrete floor is not very flat. After leveling over from the back and the side, which was nailed on there nice and level, I ripped it down and it fit like a glove. And with that done, it was finally time to get into the sheeting. With that squeak, you know that's a nice tight fit. And I'm not going to nail it down right away. There's still something I have to do before I do that. And with that, I think I've had enough for one day. After a trial run on the steps, I think they're going to work out real nice. But that's not it for the day. The night shift came in and tore out the old floor in the bedroom. We'll put new flooring in here to match the rest of the space. And if you're wondering, this is my daughter and my 3 grand puppies. She's a pretty good hand for the painting and finish work, so she'll probably be helping me a little bit more throughout the rest of this process as we get it finished up. I mentioned earlier there was a reason why I didn't nail down this sheeting, and that's so I can get these water lines through this wall and into the base. I'm using 1/2-inch PEX, so I just drilled a couple of holes through this rim board into the basement. I figured that was a lot easier than when I ran the drain line and had to go through the block wall. Then I just drilled a couple more holes right here next to the sink drain, and then put these handy dandy little clips on there to secure it. That should work. Let's get back to the sheeting. After removing the sheeting, I laid down a good bead of construction adhesive across the top of each joist, and then I nailed it down with 8-penny ring shank nails. We do this on new construction and it works great. It minimizes the squeaks. And that leads us to our last little bit of framing. Since you've made it this far into the video, I hope you're enjoying it, so maybe consider liking and subscribing. It really helps. You know how I told you that was the last little bit of framing? I lied. There's just a little bit around this door that we need to wrap up before we can jump into the sheetrock and finish it up, and you can see how cool this little area turned out. Basically, I just ripped this 2x down for a header to make the rough opening on the door the right height. Then I cut and nailed a 2x2 on each side for a trimmer. That gave me the correct rough opening width, and it gave me something to nail the casing to when we're doing the finish trim. And with the framing complete, that brings us to getting the rest of the drywall hung in this area. I kind of just time-lapsed through it. I don't go into a lot of detail on this drywall, but stick around and check out how cool it turned out. And as always, thanks for watching.